to Velshi on MSNBC. I'm Charles Coleman Jr. in for my friend and colleague, Ali Velshi. Donald Trump is facing no fewer than 4 criminal indictments and 2 civil cases, all while running for president. And we might now start to see just how tough the self-proclaimed Teflon Don truly is. The first co-defendant in the Fulton County election interference case has pleaded guilty. Scott Hall, a bail bondsman, has pleaded guilty to 5 misdemeanor charges, and he will be sentenced to 5 years probation if he abides by the terms of the deal. He also agreed to testify in related court hearings and trials. And in the federal election interference case, Federal District Court Judge Chanya Chukton rejected Trump's request to recuse herself from the case. All of this is going on while special counsel Jack Smith's team is pressing for a limited gag order on Trump, citing his pattern of incendiary and intimidating statements toward people involved in the case. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is expected to arrive in New York City this evening ahead of the civil fraud case by New York Attorney General Letitia James, which goes to trial tomorrow. Now, that's on the heels of a judge ruling this week that Trump and his company are liable for fraud by misstating the true values of multiple real estate properties. Still, despite all of that, Trump still remains strong in the 2024 polls. Not just strong, but the front runner. His supporters do not seem fazed, not even in the least bit, by the ever-growing list of points and cases and charges against the former president. Joining me now is Tim O'Brien. He is the senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, an an MSNBC legal analyst, as well as the author of Trump Nation, The Art of Being Donald Trump. Tim, you have literally written the book on Donald Trump. Does this civil business fraud trial move the needle at all for his supporters? If he's overstated his net worth literally by billions, does that somehow change the opinion that GOP voters are going to have of him?
I don't think it changes their opinion of him at all, Charles, because I don't think he's a cult leader at this point. He's moved beyond even being an old-fashioned political boss. He is overseeing a cult that is deeply and passionately attached to him, and nothing that he does is going to move the needle, particularly, I think, what he's done in the business world, because everything that brought him into the public eye originally, you know, his real estate and casino deals in the 80s, and then, of course, The Apprentice in the 2000s, were all around this image of him as a multi-billionaire can-do entrepreneur, and that is what got him attention initially. But I think he's transitioned now into a very different world. So I don't think it matters with his political supporters. It is, however, this case that starts tomorrow is going to have great consequence for his business dealings. And Donald Trump doesn't spend a day without thinking about how many money bags are on his desk.
Tim, one of the things that I want to talk to you about is this sort of scale. And on one hand, you have the notion of Donald Trump and everything that he's dealing with around his criminal cases, his civil cases, and his popularity, and how that sort of continues to go up and up and up. And you were just talking about that. But then on the other hand, you have the notion of public fatigue. So for people who might not be Donald Trump supporters, they might oppose him, they might not be huge fans. I think at one point they were really, really watching everything to try to see when this was going to ultimately catch up with him. But after so much coverage, after so much time, after him being able to keep so many different things at bay, there is a sense of public fatigue in terms of just being over it. Which bubble do you think burst first, his popularity or the public sort of fatigue where they ultimately become desensitized to all things Trump?
Well, having just said that I don't think his political supporters care about the litigation involving his business practices, I do think the Georgia case, Fani Willis's case in Georgia, the Fulton County District Attorney's case, and the 2 federal cases, the one on allegedly stealing classified documents, the Mar-a-Lago case, and then, of course, the January 6th case, a fraud on the government case. I think those three are in a very different place. And again, I don't think those cases will matter to true believers. I think we have to really consider that a lot of the polling that has gone around, looking at how people feel about those cases, the most likely respondents to those polls are the same people who respond to primary polls, the most dedicated and involved voters. So there may be some error in what those polls are suggesting. I also think we should remember that when the January 6th hearings finally took place after months and months of document work and media attention to it, when the hearings actually got underway, it shifted public opinion and educated the American public about what January 6th was about. And I think the Georgia case will be televised. I think there's 2 federal cases coming down the pike, and we really don't know what the impact on public opinion will be when those things see the light of day. And the real crucial voters in all of this won't be the diehard Trump fans. It'll be independent voters, and it'll be moderate Republicans and conservative Democrats who are going to be in this middle vote in 6 or so swing states. They're going to determine who wins 2024. And I think those cases are going to hurt Trump.
Speaking of those cases, Tim, you've got as much insight into the former president as anyone else, having written the book on him literally. I got to ask, part of what was driving Donald Trump's resistance to keeping the government open and pushing the notion of a shutdown was that he believed somehow that would freeze or stop Jack Smith and the DOJ from moving forward with its cases against him. Do you think that is a sign that he is actually scared of these prosecutions?
I think he's terrified of these prosecutions, Charles. For all of the mythology that's around Donald Trump having 9 legal lives, the reality is he has never had a full-blooded federal prosecution on his doorstep. He and his father were investigated by the federal government in the early 1970s for racial discrimination at their housing project in Brooklyn and Queens, but never since then, and certainly not a purposeful, detailed prosecution that has a criminal prosecution that has very dire consequences. He has not had good lawyers traditionally. He routinely stiffs his lawyers. He's a difficult client for them to deal with. He doesn't come into a confrontation like this with a lot of artillery on his side. And it's uncharted waters for him. So I think this idea that he's escaped the law all the time in the past ignores the fact that the law hasn't really come down on him very hard, and it is right now. And I do think he feels cornered. And you see it in his attacks on the judges, his attempt to, I think, to imitate witnesses. All of that is someone who's deeply, deeply afraid and wants to court public opinion in order to try to save his skin.
Uncharted waters indeed, and it seems like Donald Trump is learning how to swim. Tim O'Brien of Bloomberg's Opinion, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Charles.
Still to come on Velshi, the Supreme Court of the United States of America. They're starting a new term tomorrow. And with the Trump-stacked conservative supermajority, every new term carries the potential for upheaval when it comes to long-held personal rights. We will break down. Welcome back to Velshi on MSNBC. I'm Charles Coleman Jr. in for Ali today. Now, as the clock was ticking toward a potential government shutdown last week, House Republicans somehow found the time to open an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. Now, a month ago, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said he would not open an impeachment inquiry without a floor vote. 12 days later, guess what he did? McCarthy did just that. He caved to pressure from the extreme right wing of the Republican caucus and launched the inquiry without a vote. Republicans allege that President Biden benefited from foreign business dealings of his son, Hunter Biden. But so far, they've not produced any direct evidence of that. And as an attorney, what I do know is that evidence is key. As the inquiry began Thursday, one of the GOP's own key witnesses made sure to mention that he did not feel that there was enough evidence against the president to open articles of impeachment. And in a viral and epic takedown of the whole proceeding, freshman Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett showed the committee what real evidence looked like. And she bought receipts. Take a listen.
As I prepared, I said, what is the crime? Because when you're talking about impeachment, you're talking about high crimes or misdemeanors. And I can't seem to find the crime. And honestly, no one has testified of what crime they believe the president of the United States has committed. But when we start talking about things that look like evidence, they want to act like they blind. They don't know what this is. These are our national secrets. Looks like in to me. This looks like more evidence of our national secrets, say on a stage at Mar-a-Lago.
Now, if you did not know the name Jasmine Crockett before, you're not likely to forget it anytime soon. Jasmine will be joining us in just a moment, and I'll be talking with the Congresswoman about this sham impeachment inquiry and the temporary fix to a government shutdown. We'll be right back with more Velshi on MSNBC. I'm Charles Coleman Jr., and we'll see you on the other side of this break. Good morning. You're watching Velshi on MSNBC. It's Sunday, October 1st. I'm Charles Coleman Jr., filling in for my friend and colleague Ali Velshi, and we've got a lot to talk about. In a surprising turn of events, the federal government will remain open after Congress managed to pass a last-minute stopgap measure late last night. Less than just 3 hours before funding was set to run out, the Senate overwhelmingly voted in favor of a short-term funding bill that was rushed to the House floor by Speaker Kevin McCarthy early in the day. Then, shortly before midnight last night, President Biden signed the bill into law, and in a statement, he called the whole episode, quote, a manufactured crisis. Now, this last-minute agreement will keep the government funded at existing spending levels until Friday, November 17th, and it authorizes additional monies to be set aside for disaster relief. However, what it does not do is include funding for Ukraine aid. This was a key sticking point for Democrats. The measure also leaves out funds for border security, which of course was one of the Republicans' top demands. Now, although this bill originated in the Republican-controlled House and was brought to the floor by Speaker McCarthy, in the end, it was more Democrats who voted in favor of it than it was Republicans. In fact, Democrats in both chambers of Congress were nearly unanimous in voting to pass the bill that prevented a government shutdown. It once again exposed the disarray among the GOP and leaves very few things unresolved. While it does give Congress an extra 45 days to come up with a funding agreement for next year, we very well could end up back in the same situation in November because of how far apart the different factions of Congress remain. And in just the last hour, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz confirmed that he will move forward with a motion to oust Speaker McCarthy.
I do intend to file a motion to vacate against Speaker McCarthy this week. I think we need to rip off the Band-Aid. I think we need to move on with new leadership that can be trustworthy.
Joining me now are NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin and senior politics reporter for Axios, Eugene Scott. Julie, we spent so much time yesterday morning talking about all of this, watching it happen live, and so much has happened since, including Gaetz, who's now saying he's going to move forward with a motion to try and vacate Congressman McCarthy. Catch us up. What's going on Capitol Hill? Tell us what you're hearing.
Well, because Speaker McCarthy ended up needing Democrats essentially to come to the rescue and bail him out so that he could pass this 45-day clean continuing resolution to stop the government from shutting down. Now he's facing new threats, some from the same person who's been threatening him all along, Congressman Matt Gaetz, who you heard from a couple of minutes ago at the top there, who want to oust him from the speakership chair because he needed more Democrats to support the bill than Republicans who ended up voting for it. Now, Speaker McCarthy, for his part, just keeps saying, bring it on. Watch this yesterday.
If somebody wants to make a motion against me, bring it. There has to be an adult in the room. I am going to govern what is best for this country. I don't understand how long will it take to understand that. I went 15 rounds.
To McCarthy's credit, he did try to appease the conservative hardliners. I'm told he even included disaster relief in yesterday's clean stopgap funding measure to try and appease some of those hardliners, including Gates, who's from Florida, whose own state was hit by natural disasters over the last few months. Obviously, no dice, more than 100 Republicans voting against that clean continuing resolution. For Gates' part, there's no one really to replace McCarthy at this moment. Gates himself is going to have to lean on Democrats to vote with him for this motion to vacate, to oust McCarthy from the speakership chair. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said this morning she would support that motion. Speaker Emerita Pelosi, on the flip side, said Democrats would be following Leader Jeffries' lead. And we know McCarthy and Jeffries have spoken many times, including just before that continuing resolution hit the floor to try and avert a government shutdown. So really all of this a live ball. But next week, according to Gates, we might see that motion finally brought to the floor.
Will be interesting to watch how this develops in terms of Matt Gaetz's threats to try and oust the speaker and what actually happens as the negotiations continue with this continuing resolution. Eugene, I want to ask you, what we saw from McCarthy yesterday is something that ultimately ended without Democrats or Republicans getting exactly what it is that they wanted. But the government stayed open. At the same time, Kevin McCarthy could have brought this to the floor much sooner and much earlier to get this done. What do you think will be the political impact? What's the narrative that will emerge around what we saw happen yesterday, particularly as it relates to Kevin McCarthy?
Well, I think the main narrative we're seeing Democrats latch onto is pretty similar to that of far-right Republicans, which is that Republicans in the House actually do not have leadership in place to lead this country in the direction that is best for most of its citizens. There are so many individuals, cafeteria workers, air traffic controllers, scientists, Border Patrol agents who were sitting on pins and needles Saturday over an issue that could have been addressed weeks, if not months before. And what the Democrats are trying to do as they make a case for their desire to take over the House is explain to people that they believe that if they were in control, this would not have happened. These issues would have been addressed far in advance. And if we continue to let Republicans remain in control, we will find ourselves in this position again in the near future.
Now, Eugene, I want to stay with you. How do you think the help that he got from Democrats, McCarthy that is, either helped or hurt his case in terms of remaining in power as a leader? And if Matt Gaetz is going to move forward and trying to get him out of the speaker's seat, do you think that McCarthy is going to get any help from Democrats to stay there?
Well, it depends on the constituency McCarthy wants to connect with. There's a real desire from the American public for bipartisanship. Polls and surveys repeatedly show that voters want to see Republicans and Democrats work together. McCarthy can point to last night as an example of him coming alongside liberals to keep the government open in the best interest of the American people. If he's trying to connect with the base, this doesn't help him that he's working with Hakeem Jeffries, AOC, Jamal Bowman, all these individuals who are lightning rods to the GOP base. And we can expect Matt Gaetz to lean on that as he seeks to move forward with removing McCarthy.
It will be very interesting to see this go forward. A lot to talk about, and we're still not done with respect to how we are going to fund our government after November 17th. We'll be talking to both of you, I'm sure, very soon. That was NBC's Julie Serkin and Eugene Scott from Axios. Thank you to you both. And now joining me in studio is one of my favorites, Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York, Queens, New York specifically. He is the ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and a senior member of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for being here. Super excited to see you and talk to you. So yesterday, big day. Is it a win, a loss? How do you sort of process what we are looking at now as we are, going forward, but also still averted a government shutdown?
Well, look, we can't forget how we got here.
Right.
We got here because of a crisis in the Republican Party who wanted to cut 30% of the budget across the board. The day before yesterday, that's what took place. Finally, Speaker McCarthy decided to do what Democrats have been asking all along, to let's have a clean CR as we continue to discuss what was going on. And basically what took place, with the exception of Ukraine funding, we got a clean CR, which we were asking for. So Democrats then were able to keep the government from shutting down. Now, I caution everyone because it's just a 45-day period. So the question is, will Republicans move from those drastic cuts that would devastate the American public to listening and working with Democrats so that we can come up finally with a budget that is working for all Americans? And so 45 days is not a long time.
No.
And so we've got to see whether or not, the Republicans will move from the disastrous proposals that they have been trying to push forward that led us to the brink. We would not have been to the brink had, in fact, they done what we requested all the time and finally had to relent and do so that we would not shut this government down.
So I want to open this up a little bit because there's a lot of conversation about what Matt Gaetz may do in response in terms of Speaker McCarthy and moving to oust him. And we know that he made all these crazy deals to even get the speakership to begin with. So he's skating on thin ice, proverbially speaking. I think one of the things that people are wondering is what happens if Matt Gaetz actually does that and then there is turmoil in terms of who the speaker is going to be. We are already seeing sort of a logjam in government already. Is it possible, and I'm not suggesting that members can't walk and chew gum at the same time, but you've got 45-day clock that's already ticking. You are talking about removing the speaker. It took 15 rounds for the last guy to get in, right? So where do we go from here, and what does the other side of that look like for government? Forget the parties, for government in terms of being able to function and do the job that you guys are sitting there to do.
But I think it is clear that the Republicans can't govern. We've seen that from the time that they've been in power, from the time that they took 15 rounds. Now, I agree with Matt Gaetz in that new leadership that can be trustworthy is needed. So I would think that, and I'm ready to work with Republicans, all we need is 5 Republicans to vote with me to elect Hakeem Jeffries to be the Speaker of the United States Congress. You'll have new leadership that is trustworthy and will be able to deliver and get things done, just as we did as Democrats with a 5-vote majority in the 117th Congress. That is the way that we can move forward. We've seen, as Hakeem has said, that he's willing to work with Republicans, and that's why we were able to avoid a shutout last night. So I think that the American public should look at this picture and see how we can progress and work together. You have one leader who is not trustworthy based upon his own membership, who's divided and they're dysfunctional, and you have another who has always kept his word, who's been putting things together, and all we need is 5 Republicans to vote with us to elect Hakeem Jeffries, and we'll work together. We won't have that dysfunction that you're seeing on the Republican side.
You've been there as long as anyone else. You've got as much political cachet as anyone on the Hill, and you're as smooth as they come. I'm going to ask you straight up, do you think that you have 5 votes? Do you think you have 3? Honestly, can you get to 5 in order to make that a reality?
Look, all I know is this. The so-called moderates on the Republican side, they are upset with what's taking place there. They see dysfunction. Now, if they truly want to make a difference and save and work for Americans, as they say, then they should not want to continue in that kind of confusion and disillusionment, and let's get something done. They're not, you said it yourself, Charles, that they may not have the ability to elect anyone. So I want someone trustworthy. I want someone that is respected. I want someone that wants to work across the aisle. To me, that's Hakeem Jeffries.
All right, let's switch gears for a moment. You have extensive experience with your work on foreign affairs, and one of the things that was left out of the resolution yesterday was aid for Ukraine. That's obviously a big issue for you. It's a big issue for Democrats. Number one, I want to know, why is this, in the most succinct way possible, so important for you? And then number two, how do you expect those negotiations to go over the next couple of weeks as we target November 17th as another date to try and make sure that we can fund the government and everything that needs to take place?
So this world is much smaller than it used to be. And we all have to work and cooperate with one another. And the threat that Putin has presented to all of us, by going into the sovereign property of Ukraine is a threat to our NATO allies, and it's a threat to the United States of America. It's a threat to our allies in Southeast Asia, and we've got to work collectively together. One of the things that President Biden has done was have us work closely together. Now that we're there, which Putin thought would not happen, thought we would be divided, now that we're there, we cannot allow the Republicans to divide us now. And so we've got to make sure we continue funding Ukraine. Look, for me, a national security, right now, by funding Ukraine, and those people are fighting on their own, all we're doing is giving them the equipment, the new to do it, so we need to continue it. But if that was a NATO ally that was strong, sure, not only would we be funding it with weapons, we would have to put boots on the ground. I don't want the most difficult votes that I have to make as a member of Congress is to determine whether boots go on the ground or not. I don't want to have to see that we have to go to Section 5 in our NATO agreement and put boots on the ground somewhere else, and we've got to send our soldiers over there where we got the brave men and women of Ukraine fighting for their own independence, and all we have to do is continue to work with them and give them what they need. And guess what? It's not just the United States alone that's doing this. It's all of our allies that are also contributing tremendously to this, and that makes us stronger as free and independent and democratic countries. And that's on the line of whether or not our integrity as a country, can they trust us? You know, they've seen what Donald Trump did. They can't trust him. They can't trust the Republicans. What's at line is our state with reference to all of our allies, that we work together, because that is tremendously important in this day and age in which we live now. And McCarthy and others on the Republican side who have said, I was in a room with Zelensky, and they said that they would give him, they told him, we will give you what you need. Now it's time for them to put up or be quiet and let Democrats take over and do what we need to do for the safety and security of our country.
A lot of ground to cover between now and November 17th. I wish you the best of luck. Congressman Gregory Meeks, one of the best dressed men on the Hill and one of the favorite alphas that I have that I know. Still to come on Velshi, Donald Trump is going to come to New York tonight in order to this week attend the civil fraud trial that's being held against him and his organization starting tomorrow. This case is in addition to the 4 criminal cases against him, but it uniquely hits at a pillar of his public persona as a businessman. And it just might tell us how tough the Teflon Don truly is or isn't. Plus, an important PSA for tens of millions of Americans. Federal student loan payments have restarted today. What you need to know about this reset and how to handle it. Coming up next on Velshi on MSNBC. Stay tuned.
I'm Mark Gastineau.
On top of high prices for so many other necessities. NBC's Priscilla Thompson has more on the people struggling to pay and the scams you should look out for.
Jennifer Hernandez doesn't know where she'll find an additional $650 a month to pay her student loans.
It's frustrating. I do intend to pay my student loans. It's just that the amount was so high. I can't afford that.
The 35-year-old middle school counselor in the Bronx is on an income-driven repayment plan with $91,000 in loans.
Everything that's coming in is either going towards bills.
Hernandez is one of the more than 43 million student loan holders whose payments are now due after President Biden's student debt cancellation plan was struck down by the Supreme Court in June. 25-year-old Kari Karanikos has taken to TikTok to stay motivated with a 6-figure student debt and an $1,100 monthly payment.
I'm lucky in the sense that I can live with my parents and I don't have to consider if I'm going to pay for groceries this month or pay for the student loans.
If you're worried about making payments, experts say check with your loan servicer to see how much you owe and when it's due. Consider an income-driven repayment plan and beware of scams promising immediate loan forgiveness in exchange for a fee. 30-year-old Bradley Alagna in Connecticut owes $147,000. He's having second thoughts about getting a loan in the first place.
Being so young and in so much debt for doing something that I thought was going to better my life, it has absolutely been the biggest regret of my life.
A reality that he and millions of others will once again face. Priscilla Thompson, NBC News.
Our thanks to Priscilla Thompson for that report. Coming up next, case after case and charge after charge. Donald Trump's support among his base still remains high. But as one trial starts with this week, we'll start to see whether that is going to change. You're watching Velshi on MSNBC, and I'm Charles Coleman Jr.
Hello, xin chào tất cả anh em. Sau đây tôi sẽ giới thiệu cho anh em một cách và hướng dẫn cho anh em một cách để nuôi và chăm một chú gà chọi được khỏe và sung căng nhất có thể. Và sau đây là cách hướng dẫn của tôi và anh em cùng tôi chiêm ngưỡng chú gà của tôi nhé. Và đây là mặt mũi mỏ. Phía này người ta gọi là, tôi thì tôi gọi là tía mật, chân trắng. Thường thường người ta kỵ gà bạch đầu trí, nhưng mà tôi thì chả kỵ cái móng nào, đá hay là được. Ở đây tôi sẽ nhốt em nó vào bu. Và muốn chiến binh của mình khỏe mạnh nhất có thể là không thể nào thiếu phần thức ăn được. Thức ăn là một phần rất quan trọng. Sau đây tôi sẽ cho anh em hướng dẫn anh em cách để cho gà ăn không bị nấm họng hoặc là tiêu hóa. Đây. Thành phần chính là thóc. Thóc thì mùa đông chúng ta có thể ngâm qua đêm được. Mùa hè thì có thể chúng ta vo sạch ngâm 3 đến 50 phút thì có thể đổ ra phơi khô ráo nước và có thể ăn được. Đây. Thóc sẽ cho vào nước này. Quay nước, đãi sạch hết chấu đi. Đãi sạch hết chấu đi. Đấy, vo sạch như thế, làm sạch như gạo mình ăn luôn. Đấy, đổ nước đi, vo tầm 2 đến 3 lần. Thường thường như tôi nhà cho các chiến binh ăn xong là vo thì có thể vo được, mình cứ căn bữa, mình vo từ sáng và mình cứ phát sạch đi như này. Đấy, làm từ sáng, xong là 30-40 phút sau, thường thường là sẽ là sáng sớm, nhưng mà đây hôm nay tôi sáng tôi cho ăn hết rồi. Đây là tôi phải vo thêm và đợi một tí nữa thì là cho ăn. Làm như thế nào cứ mình cứ cho ăn mình làm một lần cho ăn 2 bữa, sáng tối, xong đêm hôm sau hoặc là sáng sớm hôm sau mình dậy mình lại làm như thế. Đấy, cho nó sạch hết chấu đi rồi. Ngâm như này 3 đến 50 phút. Đấy, ngâm như này 3 đến 50 phút, nước trong như này, ngâm đây 3 đến 50 phút là có thể đổ ra phơi khô cho gà ăn được. Muốn con gà của mình mà sung khăng đỏ khỏe thì không thể thiếu được một lọ mồi cóc như này. Đấy, đây là mồi cóc tôi đặt của anh Trương Lê. Đây, có mỗi ngày thường thường bây giờ mùa nóng tôi cứ cho ăn mồi này, thì ngày nào mình phải cho ăn. Đấy, mồi này ngày nào mình cho ăn. Nhưng con này thèm mồi, nó nhìn thấy mồi là nó rình ra để nó mổ luôn. Đấy, nó cứ tìm được ra để nó mổ. Đấy, mồi cho ăn ngày ăn 2-3 viên được, mỗi ngày ăn 2-3 viên. Sáng mình cho ăn thóc xong thì tầm độ 9-10 giờ mình cho ăn mồi kèm theo rau giá cà chua để con gà nó được bổ sung. Ăn mồi này thì có khả năng nó sẽ rất nóng, thì mình cho ăn thêm rau giá cà chua để cho nó hãm cái nóng ấy nó lại. Ăn mồi này thì gà cực kỳ sung căng đỏ khỏe, với cả nhanh vào cốt con gà. Đấy. Nhiều anh em nuôi gà những con gà tơ như này là đã lôi đi cứ thế thử túi bụi rồi, là không cho nó khô khén lông lá là để nó thử sớm, là con gà nó sẽ hỏng cốt sớm. Về sau là xương cốt nó bị như kiểu người anh thế, đấm nhiều vào một chỗ là nó đau. Thì đây con gà thì đánh nhiều vào là sẽ sau là nó sẽ giảm độ tải đi và lông lá nó sẽ bị hỏng. Trong khi đến lúc mà mình vần khai chậm rồi, bọn cùng tuổi của mình nó mới vần thì lông lá chúng nó đẹp, chúng nó nhìn thấy mình thì bụi mù lên, là chúng nó sẽ bảo mình là gà già, thế không nên. Anh như tôi thường tôi nuôi gà là 11 tháng, 11 đến 12 tháng thì tôi bắt đầu tôi mới cho mở mỏ. Tầm đấy lông lá các thứ là vào cốt hết rồi. Thì nói chung là tầm đấy nó chỉ có ăn với nó nuôi lực của nó thôi, không phải nuôi lông với cả không phải nở xương nở cốt nữa. Vần tầm đấy thì nó sẽ ra đòn ra lối hơn, và con gà mình chăm hàng ngày thì nó cũng sẽ khỏe hơn. Đấy. Con gà tơ theo anh em thì cách chăm như thế là đã đủ chưa? Nếu mà thiếu thốn cái gì hoặc là cần suy nghĩ kinh nghiệm gì thì anh em có thể chia sẻ vào đây, tôi có thể tôi học theo anh em, tại vì tôi cũng mới chơi gà nhưng mà gọi là nuôi về đam mê. Đấy, anh em là có kinh nghiệm và dày dặn hơn thì có thể chia sẻ vào đây để tôi học hỏi. Tất cả anh em vừa rồi đấy là tôi gọi là giới thiệu một phần là về chú gà tơ của tôi, với cả giới thiệu về lọ mồi cóc tôi đang dùng cho chú gà tơ của tôi ăn, và cách thức cho ăn thóc hoặc là làm thóc sạch như vừa rồi. Rất cảm ơn anh em đã tìm và xem video của tôi. Hẹn anh em vào video sau, khi nào vần em này hoặc là tôi sẽ nuôi, tôi sẽ quay cho anh em xem hàng ngày em nó sẽ tiến bộ như thế nào. Chào anh em.